So we're up to lesson 21. It's the end of chapter 3, where we've been talking about how to make 3D objects in Wysiwyg. We're going to finish this off by learning how to import a 3D file from another program. In this case, it's going to be 3D Studio Max. We've already imported a 3D model from AutoCAD that came in with a 2D plan. So we've seen how that can work. But coming from 3D Studio Max is a bit more complicated. There's more file type options. And we're going to learn how to import something as an FBX and as a DWG, just so we can see the two different options and the difference between the two and what options it gives you once you've imported it. It's also really important here to start thinking about how you organize your file types. I have already shown you how to layer things, but this starts when you are building your 3D Max model or whatever software you're using. It's really important to have a system, to have everything organized, have lists with labels on them. I keep a notebook with lists of all of the different objects in that I'm going to export, so it's really clear that I have a downstage border or an upstage border, and they're already labeled for me because I'm going to repeat that labeling over and over again. So let's go and have a look at how we can import 3D models. So in lesson 21, final lesson of this chapter, chapter 3, it's all about 3D modeling. We're going to import the 3D Max file. So the first thing I want to do is to just turn off everything in my CAD layer, because frankly that's going to get in the way when I bring in my 3D model. We can turn it back on again later, but I'm just going to click here, turn off that group. I've got my new objects, which I haven't put in a layer yet. That's very naughty of me, so I'm just going to right click on those, go to properties, and come across to my tab that says general, and just apply them to another layer in here. And because I've already turned these off, all these layers are already off, so I'm just going to set it to SV1 main. And when I hit OK, it's going to turn them off automatically because that layer is already off. So there you go, and I've got a completely empty file now. Now I'm going to drag my 3D Max file back in here. We looked at it at the beginning of this chapter. I'm not going to go into 3D Max in detail here. It's a very exciting but complicated program. I don't really want to confuse you with too much 3D Max training right now. The only thing I'm going to show you is that there's lots of elements. You left click and select objects. I've already grouped some of these, so that's all my borders and legs there in one piece. All my legs there in one piece. If I don't think anything's going to move, it's fine to have it grouped, but when you're in 3D Max, depending on how you export it, you may not be able to separate them later. So if I export those as one element, it will come in as one element, and I won't be able to change the height of one border without moving all of it. But it really depends on what we're going to do with it. So essentially the differences between the two file options, we can export to DWG or we can export to FBX. So if I go into my file export options, file export, export, and it's going to load up the file, and I'm just going to grey this out, and let's load up the correct folder, and then ungrey it. So this is my generic folder here for saving things to. I'm going to go into my 3D model folder. I might create a new folder called exports, and then I've got options here to save it. So it's automated set to FBX, that's what I tend to prefer, but these are all the options I could export to. Now I can tell you, top of my head, that Wysiwyg will accept an FBX, a 3ds file, a collada file, DAE, a DWG. It does accept DXFs, but DXFs are inherently 2D. You can't have a 3D model in DXF, so you can't import that. It'll import an OBJ. A lot of these others are for other programs, like an STL is what you use for 3D printing, for instance. Yeah, they all do different things. There's Illustrator files, Limbics are a different type of 3D modeling program. So the two I'm going to look at is FBXs and DWGs. Now the reason for that is that all of the others could, in theory, export textures, but they don't seem to import for me when I import them into Wysiwyg. Wysiwyg reckons it can be done, but what it does, it separates the textures out into separate folders. Doesn't embed it into the 3D model. I like to keep things really simple. So DWGs and FBXs are what I prefer. I've actually got a third process that I prefer more than anything, which is to use a system called SimLab, which is a plugin that you can buy for any 3D program, but you have to buy it specifically for the one that you're using. So I bought it with 3D Max. It appears up here as a menu, which I haven't got installed in this version. You can export your model as a SketchUp file, and SketchUp files import really nicely into Wysiwyg. It preserves all the textures, it preserves the coordinates and the scale, and I'd highly recommend that. If you're going to do a lot of 3D modeling, and exporting to Wysiwyg. I think it's about £100 a year. It's money well spent. It will save you hours and hours and hours. But in this case, you've got FBXs and DWGs. So the difference is that DWG will export all of your geometry, but it will lose all of your textures. So you won't have any images. An FBX will export your geometry with the texture, but you'll lose its position on the stage, because when you import it to Wysiwyg, it will always move things to the center of its mass. So if I selected this proscenium, for instance, and made that an FBX, that point there, what it sees as the middle of these three objects, will always get put down here to the center of the of your scene. Same thing, if I selected this rostra at the back here, that's now the origin, it will position it here. So basically every time you import an object into Wysiwyg, you'll lose its position on stage, which is really frustrating actually. It's something I don't like, and I've reported it, but apparently other people like it, so it's just me. But the idea is that what I would do is I'd have my 2D plan, I'd import everything as an FBX and then drag it into position on stage using the ground plan as a reference, like having spikes on the stage, or your tape marks. The reason for this is that I texture everything. I like everything to look really pretty, always have textures on it. In this case, all of my borders and my legs, they don't have textures, they're just black. And they'll always be black. I don't need them to have any other information on them. So I am going to export those as a DWG. So I'm going to select them, go File, Export, and this time select Export Selected. Bring up my window. And I'm going to move this out again so I can move it to the right folder. You can't see the other projects I'm working on. 3D models and exports. Okay, and come back again, and I'm going to choose DWG. Where's it gone? And I'm going to call this legs and borders and save it. And that's going to export DWG. It's going to say yes, do you want to convert all the instances to blocks? Just selected objects only rather than the entire scene. Click OK, and that's going to do that. And then what I'll do is, while it's still selected, I'm just going to hide it by right clicking and go hide selection. And so I'm not teaching how to use 3D Maxi, I'm just showing you my process. Now I'm going to select this proscenium arch here, and I just want to demonstrate how textures work. So I'm going to click and drag from my other window a nice image. This is just a JPEG. It doesn't look like very much at the moment. I'll demonstrate why in a sec. Click and drag it over into each of these objects. Now there is a material library that does this, that can do this more efficiently, but I'm just doing it quickly to show you how it works. Now you can see here it's done a nice rainbow chase, but over here we're only getting one colour, it's just getting the edge. So what I actually want to do is to map that rainbow chase equally across all the proscenium, so it looks like one giant piece. So I'm going to select all these and do a UV map, which again I'm going to do quickly. I'm not doing this to show you how to do it, I just want to demonstrate to you what a UV map is and how it's relevant. So I've now got the ability with my UV map to move my image across that shape. So I might use this tool to maybe position a texture of like bricks on a model, or to lay out a tree shape. I can tile it, make 4 across rather than on one. It's not very pretty, but if you had maybe like grass or something and it was a texture that could be tiled easily, you could create a nice high resolution grass texture on the floor. And I'm going to leave that there so we can demonstrate how this works when we import it. But you see that now it's 3 objects, but with that texture run across it, it looks like one large object. I could also do this for all of these objects here, because these are my LED tiles. Now eventually these will actually be made of emissive materials, so I'm really doing this just to demonstrate the point. So I'm just going to select all these by holding down Control. And there we go. And this time I'm going to use my material editor just to save time. So I'm going to select this, load up a blank slate. I'm going to drag my image in. Click apply that image to those materials, and there we go. This creates a nice UV map all across all of those. It's done it automatically. So I'm going to bring those in now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off these side bits. I don't want those in my model. I'm just going to hide selection again. Now actually we've already got a lot of this scenery in my model because it came with the CAD file. So it's already been imported as a DWG from the CAD. So I'm just going to select all of this and this at the back. Just do high selection, see how much that gets rid of. Don't need this bit here. Don't need that bit there. I don't need this full stage. I'm going to do high selection, all of those. So I'm just come down to what I've got textures applied to. High selection. And I'm really simplifying this just to make it easy to demonstrate the point, because I don't want to have to do the whole project again just to demonstrate it. If you're interested in what this moiring effect is, what that means is that there's two objects sitting right on top of each other. So if I drag that out, you see now it doesn't do it so much. Oh no, it is. There's two planes sitting right on top of each other, which you fix by making sure that they're not sitting on top. It's just lots of objects all right next to each other there, all interacting with each other, intersecting. And that happens quite a lot with CAD drawings that have been imported into 3D Max, and you can fix it by making it yourself in 3D Max and just having a nice efficient modelling, which I'm not going to cover here, as I keep saying. We're going to do that in a completely different series. I'm going to go into a nice deep dive of 3D Max because it's such a great tool. So now I'm going to export these as FBX files. Now these are the ones that are going to lose their positional information, so we've got to accept that up front. I'm going to do an FBX export by going export selected. It's gone to my folder. I'm going to go to FBX this time. Now I'm going to name this as Proscenium. Really important you name everything and name them well. Make sure it's consistent across all the other things you name them as. Right, and this time it's going to bring up a different window, FBX settings. Now FBX is actually, it's called Filmbox. It was made by Pixar Animations. It was bought by Autodesk. I think I got that right, but it's now the standard way of transferring 3D data across all Autodesk platforms. Now the important one here is embed media. You need to make sure this is turned on, because that is what's going to make sure that the picture that I've just imported is applied to that model. Otherwise it just comes in as a 3D geometry. All this other stuff like cameras and lights, you can turn them off if you want, but it'll only export them if they're in the scene. It's designed for when you have a really large project file with cameras and you're doing renderings, and you've got it's basically for the film industry or the games industry when they have lots of complicated assets loaded up into the file and you want to transfer it to another program. All we need is embed media. We click OK, and it's going to export that. I'm going to select this. Oh, don't want all that stuff at the bottom. I hold down Alt to deselect things. No, it's not going to let me do that. This stuff here. Anything like this that's a bit odd that comes in, it may look like nothing because nothing's actually there, but it does. It still counts as geometry. It might be so tiny you can't see it, but made up of thousands and thousands of polygons. So we really want to keep this tidy, and this is another reason why it's always good to build things from scratch in 3D Max. Export selected, FBX, I'll call that pyramid, and save. Now if you're working a different 3D modelling program, Vectorworks, Blender, Maya, you'll have the same sort of export options. The difference is, particularly Vectorworks, you can't do UV mapping. So what I've just done by making that image nice and neat, you won't have that option. But you could use Cinema 4D, which is part of the Vectorworks family under Metric. You could do it in that. So yeah, it really depends on the program you're used to using. So what will work. So let's just go back to Wysiwyg and we'll import those FBXs. I'm just going to bring in the proscenium arch. It'll be enough just to demonstrate the point. Let's go to the proscenium, click open. It's going to bring up the merge window, which gives you the option of importing 000 or the base point. As discussed before, always use 000, even though with FBXs it doesn't actually make a lot of point, because it kind of takes the center of the object as the center of the FBX and import that into the 0 point. So it won't be in the position that it should be on from your plan. So it could be a bit of a waste of time, but it's just good exercise to have. In here, just make sure your Z axis is pointing up. In some programs, it's Y that points up. Just make sure that's in there. We're in inches. Make sure it's not on auto scale. This is so that if you're downloading an object from a website, if you want to get a free 3D model or you paid for one, you could download, for instance, a game character which might be drawn in meters rather than millimeters that come in too small, or vice versa. So just setting the scale to 1.8 meters or something will make sure it's the right height. But if we're doing our model properly in another program, then we should be using this. It should always be in the scale that we've set our 3D modeling program to. And the same idea applies here. This is mesh decimation, where you can reduce the number of polygons in your 3D model, which is a really cool tool that Wysiwyg have put in. I mean, that's quite clever that you can do that. Basically, if something's 200,000 polygons, you tick this box and it will reduce it to 100,000 for you. But my view is that if you're using this, then you haven't done your 3D modeling properly. You should have built that correctly in the first place, so it's optimized. And I don't know what Wysywyg's doing to my model. It could be deleting all the wrong bits out to get it down to 50% of the original size. So I prefer not to use that. For me, it should always be built correctly. So we're just changing the scale and making sure that the Z-axis is up. Let's click Finish and click OK. It gives us a little summary. And load up our FBX with our rainbow image on it. So we can drag this around in here. Let's just pull it up a bit. It's gone in a really weird place now. Let's move it out of the way. So I'll move my Y-axis on, the Ortho mode. Drag it over there. There we go. Now really we need our plan back now so we can put this in the right location. I would just say that if you wanted to access the legs rather than the border, because we exported this as one big object, it is all connected. If you wanted to try to break it up, like you can with a DWG, watch what happens. Solids into set pieces. Oh, it's allowed, it worked. I tried this a minute ago and it completely destroyed my textures, and now it's working. So there you go. So you can do it. You've got to get it. Must just be luck. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the idea is that you tend to import it as one great big object, and you can't separate things afterwards. It worked for me just then, but literally half an hour ago I was testing this lesson and it didn't work for me. So I wouldn't rely on that. If you're going to export an FBX, I'd make sure that you export every single element that you want to have separate as a separate FBX. So you import the leg, the other side leg, the top, and just label it all correctly. So everything's stage left underscore leg, stage right underscore leg, just so it's all really clear. So now I just want to position that in the right place. I'm going to import my stage plan. So now it all gets quite busy again. My proscenium arch is selected. I'm just going to drag that over to there, and I've got my Ortho mode on, so I'm just going to move it across. So I've eyeballed that, but that's pretty much in line. Now let's have a look at it in my section view. Just drag it down so it's sitting on the floor. And there we go. So obviously the Churchill Theatre doesn't actually have a rainbow chase proscenium arch, but it's it'd be quite fun if they did actually. I might suggest it to the next time I'm there, but it's a way of demonstrating to you how you can get textures onto scenery and put that scenery into Wysiwyg. For me, all the best models that I've done have really nicely textured 3D sets. The lighting designer in particular engages much better with a 3D model if it's got textures on it, because they can see how their lighting looks in the bigger picture. I found programmers aren't that bothered. They're quite happy if it's just grey. All they really care about is it getting in the way of the light? Can I focus around it? Is my am I zooming out too far? The practical elements of programming and focusing a light. Directors and designers, on the other hand, they get a bit funny. If you put all your textures into a 3D model like this, when they see it and it's not quite the shade that they were imagining, they will fixate on it. If it's not quite the right shade of blue, they will not be talking to you about the lighting. They will not be engaging with a lighting designer. They'll just be asking you to fix all the colours because it doesn't look right in the 3D model. I'm generalising, not all of them are like this, but I've had it so many times that if a designer is going to come up and join us in a session, I warn the lighting designer I'm going to turn all the textures off and import another version of the file with just grey versions of the scenery, because they can then appreciate that it is just a visualization. If you start making it look too nice, they really get locked into it. But that's just my limited experience working with mainly opera set designers. And I've worked with some that are brilliant and just get it and understand that the textures are there to support the 3D model. So judge it on your own project, but that's just my experiences. So that sort of rounds up this chapter. We're going to move on now to lighting in the next chapter. We're going to spend quite a few lessons looking at how to import and manage our lighting systems, get them all set up. So we're going to start to see this whole production coming together then. thank you for joining me on this chapter. I hope it's been useful. I'll be really interested to get your feedback. If you want to share with me, my email address is james.simpson1@bruford.ac.uk. That's Bruford spelled BRUFORD. Leave comments in the comments section on YouTube. Just generally share whatever you're doing. I'll be really interested to see how useful these videos are to you. It'll motivate me to do loads more. Okay, thanks everyone.